Good Shabbos, everybody. Is now the time to start, Mr. Director? 2 thumbs up. Okay. Let me make sure my phone is relatively silent. Okay. Sorry about that. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Good. So, Shabbat Shalom, welcome. The schedule coming up, let me talk about it for a few moments. Next week, I will be reflecting on 10 years here. This is my 10th anniversary here. And, thank you. And it is also, sadly, Rabbi Wein's yahrzeit. I'd forgotten that when I scheduled it, but you know, he was a big part of why I'm here. So, yeah. So I'll also be obviously paying tribute to him at that time. The following week, we will hear from Jeremy Moss, who is rescheduling from his rescheduled rescheduling. But I think, according to Michael Ross, who helped set this up, I think we got him penned down now. And the week after that, we will be hearing from representatives of a couple of groups that are working to end gun violence, specifically here in Michigan, working on legislation, including a former teacher at Oxford High School, who was there for the shooting. And we're working on 2 students as well who survived that horrible attack, which was a year and a half ago now, about a year and a half ago. Following that, the schedule's a little bit in flux because I had a little bit of change in my schedule, but I believe on the 18th, we will not have a regular service, but instead we'll meet at 6 o'clock. We'll be having a pizza dinner and salad, for those of you watching as I should be. And we're going to watch a brand new film, a documentary called The Settlers, which explains the settlement movement in Israel. And while it was made before the recent uprisings against the judicial reform, the settlement movement has an enormous amount of has made an enormous contribution to what's happening right now in a negative way. I was trying to say it in a way that didn't sound so negative. And then there's all kinds of wonderful things coming up, a bar mitzvah, the holidays. I know for you they seem 2 months away, which they are, but for me they're tomorrow. In the sense of the pressure I'm feeling, as I always do. But I hope you'll encourage your friends to come. We're back in full frontal force with in-person services. And there's all kinds of other wonderful things coming up, from the Workaday, or I think very fun gardening group, to Mahjong, to the book group and the film group. They're going to be viewing and talking about Oppenheimer soon. And so many more things happening. So please, and if you know young people, families especially, Spinoza is going to be getting back up in gear in mid-September. And Spinoza, if you don't know it, hopefully you do, you've read my commentaries, Spinoza is now a family education program. It's not school anymore. It's an opportunity for the whole family to learn together, and the children have time on their own, and the parents have time with me or someone else. And it's project and topic-based, so that we have fun learning together about one thing or another. And it's really been a big success to have 25 families together, singing, eating bagels, learning a little Hebrew, and then children going off in one direction, the parents in the other, and rejoining again. So tell your friends on that. We'll be having an open night on August 17th. Our readers tonight are Elaine Fieldman, Susie Friedman, Susie Citron, Bob Citron, Lonnie Fleischer, and Deborah Shanker. And Arthur, if you will, we'll begin with our first slide. A poem by a woman who was simply known as Zelda, the poet. To light candles everywhere, that is Shabbat. To light Shabbat candles is a leap of our spirits, pregnant with potential, into a splendid sea where we can contemplate the mystery of the fire of sunset. Lighting the candles transforms our space into that legendary river of fire where our hearts set in an emerald waterfall. I know some of you are into literature, so a little challenge to identify what the metaphor is of the river There's no prize money, though. We'll continue by lighting our candles, and I invite Helen and Saul Foreman, in honor of their new home, to come light those with us.
Baruch haor ba'olam. Baruch haor ba'adam. Baruch haor ba'shalom. Ba'shalom. Baruch haor. Baruch haor. Ba'shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom. When we meet each other on Shabbat, we think of Shalom, peace. It's right there in the greeting. Shabbat has always been a symbol of peace. Our ancestors called it a taste of the world to come. The peace that they sought to create on Shabbat teased them with hopes that such calm might one day prevail throughout the world. Perhaps it was just a fantasy, but it gave them comfort nonetheless. Today we understand that if we desire such a world, it must come through our own work. Perhaps Shabbat can remind us of that. Shabbat Shalom, to a Sabbath of peace.
Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, lechu v'nelcha. Ki mekor habracha, mekor habracha. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael.
At one with our forebears, we affirm that our righteousness and enlightenment shall be our torch. We shall teach these values diligently to our children all the days of our lives. We shall endeavor to live by these values in the comfort of our homes or on cold and windswept roads. Whether adversity bows our heads or fulfillment makes our spirits soar, our hands shall mete out justice to all, and our eyes shall be open to the light of truth. We shall emblazon our paths through life with this light as a beacon for all humanity.
Eifori oripi, eifo tikvati, tikva תחושתי בי, איפה כוחי, כוחי בי, וגם בת, וגם בת, איפה כוחי, כוחי בי, וגם בת, וגם בת. Where is my light? My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength is in me. And in you, and in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me. And in you, and in you.
Let us strive to lead loving, compassionate lives with our hearts, with our wisdom, and with our actions. These words we inscribe in our innermost being, aspiring to practice them day and night, teaching them diligently to our children, through our words and especially through our deeds, so that the next generations may learn to revere and celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie.
נפתח לנו שערי צדק, חן וחסד ורחמים. נפתח לנו שערי צדק, חן וחסד ורחמים. זה השער לשלום, נפתח לנו ונבוא בם. זה השער לשלום, נפתח לנו ונבוא בם. נפתח לנו שערי צדק, חן וחסד ורחמים. ויפתח לנו שערי צדק, חן וחסד ורחמים.
Shabbat Shalom. Robert Ingersoll, one of the towering humanists of the 19th century, wrote, "If abuses are destroyed, we must destroy them. If slaves are freed, we must free them. If new truths are discovered, we must discover them. If the naked are clothed, if the hungry are fed, if justice is done, if labor is rewarded, if superstition is driven from the mind, if the defenseless are protected, and if right finally triumphs, all must be the work of our hands. The grand victories of the future must be won by us and by us alone."
לא עליך המלאכה לגמור, לא עליך לגמור, לא עליך המלאכה לגמור, לא עליך לגמור, ולא אתה בן חורי להיבטל ממנה, ולא אתה בן חורי, ולא אתה בן חורי לבטל המלאכה לגמור, לא עליך לגמור, לא עליך המלאכה לגמור, לא עליך לגמור.
I like to look at all of you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Isaiah prophesied, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." The poet, Yehudi Amichai, wrote, "Don't stop after beating the swords into plowshares. Don't stop. Go on beating and make musical instruments out of them. Whoever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first." This is funny.
Na'aseh shalom, shalom ba'olam. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom, shalom ba'olam. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom.
In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support. Those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. Tonight, our well wishes are extended to these members of our community and to their loved ones, to Nitzan Bengal, Ruthie Goldman, Ruth Moltz, Mary Monahan, Rabbi Peter Schweitzer, and Jim Walker. And as we do each week, if there's someone whom you're thinking about whose name you'd like to share, please do. Carolyn? Thank you. Anybody else on the side, and this side here? Over on this side over here? Did we miss someone? Yes? Thank you. Anybody else at all? May all who suffer know that they are not alone, that we are there. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a refuah shlema, a complete recovery, the renewal of their bodies, and the renewal of their spirits.
Makom HaKoach betocheinu, Mekorot HaBracha michevroteinu. May the source of strength that dwells so deep within us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Shalom. Mekom HaKoach betocheinu, Mekorot HaBracha michevroteinu. May those in need of healing know refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Shalom. If I should die and leave you here a while. Oh, I'm sorry. Deborah, come on up. I didn't see the name. Come on. That's definitely your reading.
She often leaves that one blank for me, so I got that. No, these are it. I'm delighted that we have someone else to do it.
If I should die and leave you here a while, be not like others sore undone who keep long vigil by the silent dust. For my sake, turn again to the life and smile, nerving thy heart and trembling hand to do something to comfort other hearts other than mine. Complete these dear unfinished tasks of mine, and I perchance may therein comfort you.
Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. As tonight, we mourn the recent death of Douglas Mann of blessed memory. As we observe the yard sites of these members and loved ones of our congregation, Edward Broida, Bill Ernst, Sidney Graber, Joseph Bernard Klein, and Ariana Kuffler. And to those names, if there's one you'd like to add as we go around the room, please do. Carolyn? Anybody else? Yes, Tom? Barbara Baco. Thanks. Yes, Deborah? Did we miss anyone? Yehi zikram livracha, we say. May their memories be a blessing, by which we mean that as we go through our lives in their absence, we hope that their beautiful times with us will grant us a measure of comfort. If you can do so comfortably, please rise as together we recite our humanistic interpretation of Kaddish. Nit gadal v'nit kadash beruach ha'adam. Let us dignify and ennoble all people in the spirit of our shared humanity. Let us acclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the whole world, even as we wrestle with its parts. Let us each, in our own way, take up our share in serving the world and seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind. May justice and peace permeate and comfort the house of Israel and all those who dwell on earth. And let us say, Ken Yehi, may it be so. Please be seated. Despite the thick stack of papers, it's actually not a very long talk. Just my eyesight goes a little bit worse every year, so the print gets a little bit bigger. So what I want to talk tonight about are these words, 16 very famous words. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. 16 words with so much meaning and so much room for interpretation. Before I get into the meat of tonight's presentation, please know that I'm going to address this as a good secular humanist, even if I do so some understanding of some of the points of view of the other side. I am personally in favor of the strictest separation that Thomas Jefferson called the wall of separation between religion and state. But I also feel that on both sides of the debate, and that includes our side, there does seem to reign a kind of ignorance about what it is that the Constitution actually says and what the source of our rift over its interpretation may be. As I gently usher us into the heart of this constitutional conundrum, I want to start with last month's Supreme Court decision in the case of 303 Creative versus Elenis, where by a decision of 6-3, I bet you can guess the breakdown, the Supreme Court declared that a person cannot be compelled to use their creative talents in service of speech with which they fundamentally disagree, particularly religiously disagree.
So was the Supreme Court limiting freedom of religion with this decision? The majority does not believe so. They argue that they are expanding freedom of religion. How so? Well, the Constitution's First Amendment's freedom of religion guarantees, the passages that I just read, are comprised of 2 clauses. Hopefully you learned this in grammar school. The second of these says that there shall be no laws prohibiting the free exercise of religion. And you undoubtedly, I hope, know that this is called the Free Exercise Clause. In this website decision, as we're going to call it, the website designer, who opposed same-sex marriage on religious grounds, claimed that by being forced to make a same-sex marriage or wedding website meant that she would be losing her free exercise of religion. Now, as an aside, and I can't resist saying this, it should be noted that it has since been discovered that no one ever asked her to do this, that the man cited in the case is not gay, he's been married to a woman for 15 years, quite happily I hear. It's a reminder that a lot of this debate is being ginned up artificially. But nevertheless, it was, and this is a different issue, and I think a very important one for our Supreme Court to deal with, it was adjudicated. You know, there used to be this thing called standing, but that's for another talk, by a lawyer probably. The website designer and those who supported her cited, of course, the Free Exercise Clause, and the court agreed that no one can be compelled to use their creative talents to state or do something that violates their deeply held religious beliefs. The decision of the court, by the way, did not go any further than that. But the obvious problem with their decision, aside from the fact that it was based on a hypothetical, as I said, what I believe to be a huge abuse of judicial power, it's that people don't understand the decision. Already on one side, I've heard people, friends, say things like, well, I guess I can now refuse to serve Trump supporters in my cafe. No, you can't. The decision didn't say that. Not supporting Trump is not a religious belief, at least not technically, but it's also not a creative endeavor to run a coffee shop, not generally. At least not one that the courts would recognize. Somebody's ringing. On the other side, we saw, much more horrifically this week, a hairdresser up north in Traverse City who announced on social media that her salon will no longer serve clients who identify as, quote, anything other than a man/woman, and then proceeded to make all kinds of derogatory comments about transgender people. She can't do that either. That's not what the court was allowing for. In fact, neither of these two assumptions have any support from any court anywhere. But they both illustrate the slippery slope that's being created by privileging the Free Exercise Clause. Because who really is to say whether your work is truly creative or your beliefs are truly religious? Just an aside, I didn't type this down, but I actually heard a discussion, serious discussion, between lawyers questioning whether or not liberal Jews and liberal Christians could even have religious beliefs on which they could stand. Because do they really believe God will do anything to them? The website case was not the first instance of a case involving creativity setting the line for discrimination based on the Free Exercise Clause. Just a few years ago, maybe you'll recall this, we had 2018's Masterpiece Cake Shop versus the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. There, and it was a much more narrow decision, the Supreme Court sided with the baker who refused to create a wedding cake for a same-sex couple based on his religious beliefs. The court held that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission violated the baker's rights under the Free Exercise Clause because it displayed clear and impermissible hostility toward his sincere religious beliefs by not giving his claims to free exercise of religion any consideration whatsoever in his refusal not to make this bespoke cake for a same-sex marriage. But the website decision took it much further, which, as I see it, and as I've explained just a little bit, has caused the confusion that's getting people to think that they can now willy-nilly discriminate against anyone with whom they disagree if they claim that disagreement is religious. Now, why is this happening? Well, it's because most conservative scholars consider the First Amendment's free exercise clause to be the most, in fact, the only really significant aspect of freedom of religion as defined in the First Amendment. And this leads them to support very broad interpretations of it that side with religious parties in disputes over laws that may be seen to impinge upon someone's religious practices. Even if it means, I should add, that they are exempt from generally applicable laws. It's a full-throated approach, to be sure, but it's not nearly as problematic, at least in my eyes, as the way they interpret the Second Amendment. It doesn't twist the words around. The Constitution does allow for this, and it is, and seems to be at least somewhat, based upon genuine adherence to constitutional principles, depending upon what exactly a person thinks is the most important part of the Constitution. And there was a time, not very long ago, when the vast majority of Americans were cool with this focus on the free exercise clause. It was very common. And I'm going to give you a little reminder. We don't have to go back to the 1920s or 50s or 70s. It was 1993 when a congressman, a notorious conservative named Charles Schumer, introduced a law into Congress called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA. It was a reaction, actually, to a previous 1990 SCOTUS decision with the very, very long name of Employment Division of the Department of Human Resources, Oregon versus Smith. Many, many, many people felt that the Supreme Court's decision in that was unfair and that it did not adequately adhere to the Constitution's free exercise clause. If you forgot the case, I'll remind you, I bet you'll remember it immediately. It involved two Native Americans who were fired from their jobs for using peyote, a hallucinogenic drug, in a religious ceremony, and they were subsequently denied unemployment benefits. The court said that the law against peyote was a broad law. It wasn't aimed at religious people. It wasn't meant to suppress their free exercise. And therefore, even if it did, in a kind of roundabout way, that was okay. They weren't being targeted. A lot of Americans were genuinely angry about that decision. So much so that they demanded that Congress find a way to protect the religious right to peyote ceremonies or other kinds of religious rituals or practices that violated broad laws with no good reason, as they saw it. And Congress, though we frequently complain that they can't get anything done, did do something unanimously. In the House, 97-3 in the Senate, they passed this RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Bill Clinton signed it. It was a big ceremony. Everyone liked the law. Everyone liked the law. Until they didn't. Just as an aside, I should mention that it actually got punctured a little bit subsequently by the court, but really only on the basis of it being a little bit too broad when it came to the states. So they kind of held back a little state power from it. But then a whole slew of states passed their own versions. Very, very popular as it was. And today, RFRA federal and all these various RFRA state clones are, for most Americans, the law of the land. Super popular, as I said, until they weren't. Why did things change? Well, here's another memory jogger for you. Remember the Hobby Lobby decision about whether a conservative Christian company could refuse to cover certain forms of contraception in their company's health insurance plan, as was required by the Affordable Care Act? Well, that decision was decided by a court pretty much like the one we have now, Anthony Kennedy was still on it, on the basis of RFRA. RFRA was what gave Hobby Lobby the right to do that. Charles Schumer's law, unanimously passed by the House, 97-3 in the Senate. Bill Clinton writing all over it. Free exercise has always been a winner with the vast majority of Americans. And it was once seen as being as important to liberals as it is to conservatives. But that was before many Americans, including and significantly secular humanists, realized that there were just a few too many side effects of cases like Hobby Lobby and the cake baker and now the website designer that seemed to be eating away at the other clause in the Constitution's guarantee of freedom of religion, the Establishment Clause. So in a moment, we're going to look at two cases from 2022, both of them decided by reference, of course, to the Free Exercise Clause, both of them completely ignoring any notion that the Establishment Clause even exists. One was called Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, and the other Carson versus Macon. But before I go into the details, let's hear what the ACLU had to say about these two cases last summer, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Establishment Clause and how it could be understood. So as I say, the ACLU was very upset about these. They issued a denunciation that said, in these cases, the conservative majority on the Supreme Court made it abundantly clear that there's little room for the separation of church and state, according to the Establishment Clause in its regressive constitutional framework. For nearly 70 years, they said, the court has recognized that both of the First Amendment's religion clauses are vital to protecting religious freedom. The Establishment Clause to protect against governmental endorsement and imposition of religion on those who don't want it. And the Free Exercise Clause to ensure the right to practice your faith, if you have it, without harming other people. But that is no more, said the ACLU. The court has increasingly treated the Establishment Clause as a historical footnote, threatening both the independence of religion and the religious neutrality of the state. So what was it exactly that the ACLU was upset about here? In what way has the Establishment Clause been demoted to an historical footnote, as they put it? Well, let's take a closer look at the Establishment Clause now, the one that the ACLU describes as providing protection against governmental endorsement and the imposition of unwanted religion. I added the word unwanted. The Establishment Clause, of course, is the part of the Constitution, the First Amendment, that says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Conservatives for many years have indeed claimed that this is a footnote, referring solely and only to forbidding the United States from establishing its own religion. In fact, there are some who even say that the First Amendment's forbidding the establishment of a state religion really only meant that the federal government couldn't do it, but that the state governments could. And many had, and continue to have official state religions for quite a while. From the 1700s well into the 1800s, there were official religions in many states. But all of them were eventually abolished. All of them were eliminated. In any case, there's never been any established religion of any importance in America, never a federal version at all, and no state version according to this understanding. So what do conservative jurists and thinkers point out? They say, well, case closed. There is no establishment of religion. It's not happening, it never did, and we don't need to worry about it, to refer to it anymore. It has no basis for us to make legal decisions. A little bit of history can tell us that this case can be read with some merit. That's why I wanted to say at the beginning, let you know where I stand, because I'm going to defend their understanding for half a second. A few hundred years ago in Europe, and more relevant to America, England, there was fighting constantly over which church would be established as the official church of England. And when they finally decided on a church, that's literally what they called it, the Church of England. They continued to fight over it with Scotland, with Ireland, with each other, between and among parliamentary factions and monarchs even. It was a big battle. You get the point. England still has, by the way, of course, the Church of England. If you watched the coronation, it was very much about that, although there was a section there, and it was repeated in Scotland, where the establishment of that church was disavowed for Scotland. I don't know if you remember that part. The king had to pledge to respect their establishment. And of course, they do mostly have the right to free exercise. So now come along 20th and 21st century liberals like me, most of you, prominently secular humanists, and we point out that maybe the Establishment Clause should not be a historical footnote. That perhaps it's not only about establishing an official church. That in modern times, it should also be understood as the establishment of a privileging or recognition for a sort of common set of theological tenets, a religious approach, if you will. One that's elevated and privileged above other religious approaches and above non-religion too. Now, I realize that the Constitution does not say that the Constitution shall not recognize a religious approach. I'm aware that that's not there. It doesn't seem to be the same thing as an establishment. But times change, and in today's world, an establishment of religion can also be understood as a coalition or a group of different established religions, denominations, if you will, of theologically like-minded people who, when they come together around their theological claims, they no longer fight about the things they fought about in the 17th century in England. Well, even if some of them call themselves Lutherans and others Roman Catholics and still others Southern Baptists, by using the power and authority of government to elevate all the things that they now share and care about together, these theological beliefs they want to be part of and recognized by the public sphere, this actually, if you think about it, constitutes the establishment of a religion. Denominations were formed out of the Reformation, but coalitions of like-minded religious groups can be said to be their heirs. It's a perfectly reasonable way to understand the Establishment Clause in the 21st century. Now, it took me a lot of words to explain this point of view, and Americans don't like a lot of words. So when they're confronted with a case like last year's Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, they perhaps fail to see how what I'm saying is playing out. So here's my analysis. I'm not an attorney, I'm just a person. But here's my analysis of what those cases from 2022, the ones the ACLU condemned, were all about. So this first one, Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, which they described as having gutted the Establishment Clause, even as it seemed to uphold the Free Exercise Clause, was a case in which the court ruled in favor of a public school football coach, a high school coach, a religious Christian, who prayed with his players while on duty, while serving as their coach in an official capacity. In so doing, he ignored what were well-established precedents about this, that had prohibited school officials from participating in or leading prayers with students. This ethically compromised court actually had to ignore the facts of the case in order to get to their decision. So if you think maybe I'm being a little too wordsmithy with my transformation of the understanding of establishment, understand two things. That was the understanding for almost 150 years or more in our courts. And two, that this court is aware of that too. which is why they leave certain facts out when they judge these cases. These things don't appear in their decisions. For example, in the decision, they characterize the coach's prayers as quiet and personal. He's just praying. He shouldn't be forbidden to do that, of course. But they were nothing of the sort. The facts of the case illustrated that what he was doing was delivering prayers from the 50-yard line audibly, immediately after games, surrounded by students. He actually demanded that he be able to continue praying with these students because he claimed that he was helping them to be better people with his prayer. The court simply ignored all of that, didn't mention it. They refused to accept the reality that, in essence, this coach had made his brand of Christianity. It doesn't matter what denomination he's in. I have no idea, and it doesn't matter in the 21st century. People hop denominations all the time. It doesn't matter because he established a religion for his football team. I guarantee you, when they weren't saying the Shema or reciting from the Quran or, giving a liberal Christian interpretation of welcoming the strangers and immigrants, I guarantee you that. The court ignored more facts. They claimed that no students were ever coerced to do this. Well, the record did show, and they ignored it, as they frequently do, ethically challenged as they are, that some players joined in prayer simply because they couldn't stand the burden of being left out. And they never addressed the reality that forcing students to have to choose whether to participate in a teacher-led prayer or whether to protest. I tried that once in Texas when I was in high school. Didn't go well for me. Or to avoid certain activities, not join the football team. That's inherently coercive. Why? Because this creates the suggestion that the school, a public institution, has itself established a religion that is elevated and privileged over others. Doesn't matter whether it's a denomination. It's still a collection of theological principles. By granting this coach his rights under the Free Exercise Clause, they allowed him to use his authority to establish one religion for his team, his public school team, his taxpayer-funded public school team. The other decision that the ACLU called a disaster for the Establishment Clause was the one I told you about, called Carson versus Macon. In this, this one made me more worrisome still. The court held for the first time that a state must fund religious activity, religious education, as part of an educational aid program. And how the hell did that happen? Well, it happened in Maine because they were being generous. They had a tuition assistance program. It paid for students in rural areas that had no public high school to attend another public, or if it was more convenient, private school in their area, on the condition and in keeping with a 150-year-old law that the use of the public funds would not be for religious instruction or indoctrination. Why? Well, they had that law because for many, many years they wanted to avoid compelling taxpayer support for religion in order to not be seen as violating the Establishment Clause. My interpretation is not the new one. It may not be the oldest one, but it's not new. In fact, it was James Madison, the principal author of the First Amendment, who explicitly warned against taxpayer funding of religion, including religious education, because he said it would be the first step in allowing the government to force citizens to conform to the preferred faiths of those in power. Exactly what this coach was doing at the 50-yard line. Well, I began by speaking about Thomas Jefferson's wall of separation. Many on the other side of this argument like to point out that Jefferson himself prayed at his inaugurations and called for national days of prayer and so forth. Well, I think we know that Jefferson got a lot of things wrong. But as it turns out, when you look at his record more closely on this, it wasn't one of them. We know from his and Madison's work on a piece of Virginia legislation called the Statute for Religious Freedom that this is exactly what he meant, a complete wall. Madison said about that law, which Jefferson had printed up in all the languages that he could think of and sent to Europe and all over the world. He said about it that it was a true standard of religious liberty, its principle the greatest barrier against usurpations on the rights of conscience. As long as it is respected and no longer, these will be safe. To be sure, the statute did give support for free exercise, but in its very preamble, it also went on to inform what they meant by that and what the balance should be. That to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical, which they felt to mean that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, even if it is on the 50-yard line, although I know Madison had not yet been to a football game. As I said earlier, there are some on the free exercise heavy side of the issue who completely reject this idea of the Establishment Clause. And I want you to listen to at least one of the most ridiculous ideas that they've invented. It's called ceremonial deism. You ever heard of this? This is a legal term, and by legal I meant lawyers made it up, used to refer to certain governmental expressions like "in God we trust," our national motto supposedly. I thought it was "e pluribus unum," but okay. Or "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance. They say that these references to God, while technically religious, have been so embedded in American society and in its traditions that they've essentially become secular. They're essentially secular, devoid of religious significance. They mean no more than to foster patriotism and promote general welfare. That through long-standing tradition, they say, their religious references have lost their religious context, viewed as secular or ceremonial. I'm sure God, if he exists, is very happy to hear that his name has no significance anymore, right? That's how far they'll go. And let me say this, and I can only speak to my own values as a secular humanist, neither these nor the other cases we've heard about tonight have any benefit for the secular. None whatsoever. And yet, it was our own failure to stand up for the Establishment Clause that got us here. RFRA's complete support in Congress. Did I mention it was passed unanimously in 97-3? Okay. And Chuck Schumer, I mentioned that part? Okay. That's what got us here, folks. As secular humanists who maybe messed up, it's time for us to take the lead in restoring value to the Establishment Clause. It is not a historical footnote. What, if not an establishment of a religion, is it when a taxpayer-funded school coerces group prayer to the coach's deity? What, if not an establishment of religion, is it when taxpayers are compelled to fund tuition at private religious schools? What, if not an establishment of religion, is it when the price of attending a local school board meeting or city council meeting or state government meeting is sitting through a prayer to Jesus or Adonai or whatever deity? It's usually Jesus, though, isn't it? Free exercise of religion is a noble promise of our nation, and we should do everything we can to ensure that where it harms no one, people should be able to exercise their religion freely. But it cannot come at the cost of exercise of non-religion. We are people with rights too, and especially not non-religion, where our persons and our pocketbooks are compelled to support a set of beliefs that we don't share and want nothing in our personal lives to do with. That's what I got to say about that. Thank you, everybody. So, like I said, I'm not a lawyer. If there's any lawyers out there, please address your complaints elsewhere, because I'm not the guy to argue with. All right, we had a closing song here, Hine Matov.
Hine Matov u'manayim shevet rahim gam ya'er shevet achim gam yachad. Behold how good it is when people dwell together, living as one people hand in hand. What keeps us safe and strong is that we have each other, one human family across the land. Hine ma tovu manai, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manai, shevet achim gam yachad.
Thank you to Joseph for the beautiful music, to David for the streaming, to Arthur for the slides. To all of you, Shabbat Shalom, and join us for our own egg.
Everybody, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, hey, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom.